Today is a meeting of the RJI Global Advisory Council meeting, and it's December 18th at 7 a.m. Pacific time, and we have members from around the world. So we're really thrilled to be here and have this meeting. We'll have other people joining us as the time goes on. So what we're going to do today is we're really celebrating this team, this incredible global advisory team that we have. We have 13 members from around the world, and we're going to start off by first introducing 3 new members, and one's been with us a little bit of time, Dr. Colleen Palinka. Did I say that right, Colleen? I tried. She's muted.
Mike is not. Sorry about that. My mic wasn't coming on. It's Polichka. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Lisa.
I wasn't even close. Okay, I'll keep working on that. Okay, and Colleen, we're thrilled to have you. You're a criminologist with Douglas College, British Columbia in Canada. And then the 2 other new members are Dr. Marie Keenan, and she's associate professor at the University College Dublin. And also we have Alva Griffith, who is a restorative justice advocate in Ireland, and she's a victim of violent crime and also an RJI ambassador. We've got 3 more people to admit here. This is a big group. Let's see if I can get them. And then Colleen, I'll have you say a few words. Hang on a second. Wow. This is our biggest group so far. My goodness. Okay, here we go. We got one more. This could complete our circle. Let's see if I can get, it's John. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Hi, Jack. Good to see you. CC. My goodness. Colleen, why don't you go ahead and start and just give, like I said, these really short kind of introductions to yourself. So it's about 7 to 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. It's absolutely an honor to be here. I'm so thrilled to be working with this group to be able to share with you and learn from you. Just a real pleasure. So yeah, I'm Colleen Plichka. I live in Vancouver, Canada, having moved here from Manitoba about 10 years ago. So I've moved from absolutely freezing cold to just cold. I've been involved in the field of restorative justice for about 20 years now. I started off working with youth that have been in trouble with the law, and now I've progressed to spending my time in prison whenever I can. I have a strong restorative justice and corrections background. So I've been teaching at the university level now for about 10 years. A faculty member at Douglas College in the Department of Criminology, primarily restorative justice and corrections. For the past 10 years, I've been volunteering, working in a federal men's prison in BC. And so we've been doing monthly conflict resolution workshops with community members and the men inside. And we've been doing weekly restorative justice circles in the prison. So my Wednesday nights are just always a drive out there. I arrange my classes around, can't teach for Wednesday night, sorry. I bring the men, or I have been able to, up to COVID, been able to bring the men, the prisoners that can come out on passes. I've been able to bring them into the classroom. And we get some really great discussions going. So it connects the students with, the men inside and learn about their life. And it connects the men with the students. And so they get to learn from each other. And we have some fantastic, very rich conversations. And I take a lot of the students into the prisons on tours, and we do circles depending on the class. Sometimes we go in and we can do circles in the prison and that kind of thing. So that's sort of my direct restorative justice work. I've been, my recent doctoral research, it was based on the knowledge that childhood psychological trauma is a profound generator of criminal behavior, and that trauma healing, or the healing of that childhood trauma, is absolutely essential for true rehabilitation to occur. And so really important from, a healing perspective, from a community safety perspective. And that was based on the years that I had worked in restorative justice and worked with the men in prisons, and sort of seeing, first with youth, who they were, and then to go into the prisons and say, these are just the same people that I saw years ago as youth, and not literally, but that's what I was seeing. And so, so I interviewed a number of former federal prisoners, and talked to them learned about the violence in their childhoods, what they experienced in their childhoods, and how that impacted them from their perspectives throughout their adolescence and then into prison. And these were lifers. Most of them were lifers, so they had spent an average of 20 and a half years in prison. And they had spent time in every security level prison in Canada. And they found prison.
And Colleen, I'm going to have to have you try to bring it to a close, since we only have so much time. Sorry about that. But
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
So I'll just wind it up. I'm sorry, I thought I had more time. So basically what I found was that the most important thing to the men was the connection with community members, and to strengthen that connection with community members. And that in fact, they found their connection with community members to reflect a trauma-informed approach, which was really critical. So as far as restorative justice now, I'm still working with the men, bringing them into the classroom, virtually, of course, men that are not in prison, men that are out, and using restorative justice in all aspects of the class, doing virtual circles and that sort of thing, since COVID has taken hold. And so with that, again, I'll close and thank you for the opportunity. It's great to meet you all virtually, and I look forward to working with you.
Great to have you, especially in Canada, since you're our first Canadian officially.
Thank
you.
We'll
move on here, and let's just have Marie and Alva. I'm going to have you both present. And again, it's about 7 to 10 minutes, which I know is hard to time. But Marie, why don't you start, and then we'll move on to Alva. Since you're kind of a team, but you're separate but equal, a team.
Would Alva be better to start? Lisa,
well, we can either way. Alva, you can't. Let me say this. I interviewed both Dr. Keenan and Alva together, and was just thrilled to meet them because they do work together. And like I said, they're separate, but they're connected. And Alva is a victim of sexual abuse and who participated in restorative justice. So Alva, why don't you say something too? And you are an RJI ambassador of restorative justice.
Okay, I'll start. So thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everybody. It's great, to speak to you all and meet you all today. So essentially, as Lisa just mentioned there, I am an ambassador for restorative justice with RJI. Basically, my interest is largely, as of yet, personal in nature, in that I engaged in a restorative meeting with the man who offended against me in 2014, and since then, it's just become, I suppose, a deep-seated passion of mine to, I suppose, communicate to the public what a powerful tool restorative justice is for victims in healing from crime, and also how beneficial it can be to offenders as well. This kind of culminated, I suppose, I traveled a lot with Marie, kind of internationally and domestically to different conferences relaying my story, and that's kind of how I've become, I suppose, an advocate in that way. But it kind of culminated in the creation of a film depicting my real life encounter entitled The Meeting. It was released in cinemas here in Ireland, for example. And I suppose I'm really happy to be part of this group because I'm really interested, obviously, in this topic, and I really want to use this also as a way of spreading the word as I see it, and eventually moving hopefully into this in a more kind of professional capacity, as I'd like to become a facilitator myself.
Excellent. It's wonderful to have you. And for those that are watching outside this group, we encourage you to look at the podcast with Marie and Alva. And also they participated in RJ World, which Martin can talk about a little bit later. Okay, Marie.
Okay, well, I am absolutely delighted and honoured to be part of the group. Really, really thrilled, and thank you very much for inviting me. I think you would probably call myself a practitioner, researcher, educator, theorist. So I have a long career I trained as a social worker. I trained then as and practiced as a forensic psychotherapist and systemic psychotherapist, and then in more recent years trained formally as a restorative justice practitioner. And I've carried out a lot of research, mainly on the area of serious crime and restorative justice. I wrote a book on sexual violence or sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. That was at Oxford University Press. And this coming 2021, Estelle Zinstag and myself have another book with Oxford University Press on, the working title is When Victims Ask to Meet with the Offender. Restorative justice after sexual violence. We've a couple of edited collections and various things. So yeah, I've gone the full gamut of, ran a treatment program for sex offenders in the community, worked in prisons, worked with victims. I've always worked with victims of sexual crime and other crime. And currently I'm interested in a lot in the whole domestic violence thing. And we've a lot, unfortunately, of domestic homicides, familicides, and I'm quite interested in seeing what we can do for the families who are left in the wake of these awful situations. So thanks very much for inviting me, and I hope I'll be able to learn a lot and contribute to.
Well, we'll be learning from you and Alva. It's so important to bring this issue of sexual violence to the public and to the nations, really, because not very many people are doing RJ in this field. Okay, thank you. Welcome. So let's move on, and I'm looking at who's up the latest or in the middle of the night. So let's see, Martin, are you the one that's, it's 1 a.m. there?
That's right.
Okay, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Okay, I'll be as quick as possible, but first of all, thank you, RJI, for your leadership and involvement in RJ World this year. It was a tremendous success as a result of the leadership of this group and Lisa. There were many organizations involved, but it was critical to have RJI leading that field, and so many people in this group here were presenters and really credited our organization and the movement. That we had 700 guests attending, 120 speakers, and people just kept on coming, and they're still watching the videos. There's calls for another one in 2021. I'm already organizing a special restorative conference for schools because there's a lot of interest in that area, and that'll be early next year. And I think it's significant to see the level of collaboration as a result of COVID, which has brought on greater dependence on Zoom, which has in turn brought not just collaboration, it's increased the collaboration, but also introduced more voices from developing nations and more remote areas, and brought them into the conversation and given them involvement and a voice. And that was one of the significant outcomes from the conference. With my Sycamore Tree Project work in Queensland, it has advanced this year.
Why don't you define what it is for those who don't know?
Sorry, yes. We bring crime victims into the prison environment to talk about the impact of crime. And, it's a few inmates and a few victims together over an 8-week period. and we've been running it for about 10 years in our state. It's running in 35 countries around the world, and Lisa was the original pilot director 15 years ago or more, maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've received a grant, a fairly modest grant, but it's one that'll help us to extend the program in the far northern area of Queensland, which is largely Indigenous. So the population of the prison there is probably 70+% Indigenous. So we're going to have to review the program to make sure it's appropriate for all of those different, different interests and different cultural perspectives. So I've found that really exciting to meet more Indigenous people, to understand their interest in restorative justice and its connection to their Indigenous justice processes that have been around for thousands of years. Yeah, so that's an exciting thing for the coming year. But very glad to be here and with such a terrific group.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much. And Martin also it produces our podcasts, and we're on podcast number, I think, 37. So we appreciate, Martin, all your work, all the support you've given us. Okay, so let's move on to Dr. Sandro Calvani, who often is not able to join us. And here he is from Thailand. And Dr. Calvani, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you very much, Lisa. I would also like to thank everybody, and Lisa in particular, for this opportunity. I've not been able to attend a few meetings in the recent past because of the difference of time. Now it is 10 o'clock in the evening here in Thailand. As you see from my face, I'm not so young. I became interested in this subject since I was very young, even during my training when I studied conflict resolution in the John Kennedy School of Government in Harvard. But later on, my career with the United Nations brought me around the world, and mostly in crisis situation, disaster situation, because I started with WHO in Africa. And in every violence, I always found a lot of crime and a lot of victims, and a lot of lack of satisfaction by victims because they were not able to get the kind of justice they were expecting. I worked many years for the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, which is involved in justice reform in many parts of the world. And I concluded my career with being a Director General of UNICRI, which is United Nations International Crime and Justice Research Institute, which mostly coordinated the work of 20 national Institute of Justice in many parts of the world. One of the latest acquisitions has been the Thai Institute of Justice. I now live in Thailand as a retired person. I still work pro bono for a local foundation, and I write books on various subjects. In the last months, I was again involved in a little bit of restorative justice work, because here the Thai Institute of Justice has been delegated, requested by the Thai government to do a kind of low profile but very wide research on the situation of justice in Thailand, which is very much demanding. There is a lot of lack of satisfaction by many people. For example, all former ministers of justice are saying that Thailand is in very bad shape. They did not say so when they were ministers, but when they retire, they say some reform should be done. A significant part of reform is related to restorative justice. So the Thai Institute of Justice in the past month did a kind of wide interview of all experts that they could find here in Thailand, and request this Thai or foreign expert to say something of what could be done. With the foundation where I'm working in the mountain of Golden Triangle on the border with Myanmar, China, Laos, we are trying to study what happened in the past 30 years where a very large population, which was largely involved with organized crime, in particular trafficking of people, trafficking of weapons, and smuggling drugs, all of them were involved in a process of transformation which did not bring any of them to prison. This is a very unique case. There are not many around the world where victims and criminals all together decided to change their mind. Not one day of prison was done by any of them. And after 30 years, this process has shown that it is possible to change the mind of the community, the mindset, building back much more prosperity. Now the region there has 78% per capita income higher than the capital. It's one of the richest part of the country. There are large social enterprises. There is a very high profit for people, but 100% of the profit is reinvested and not distributed. It is reinvested in public health and in education. So we are studying the model because a lot of people visit us. Last year we had 108 foreign delegations visiting this corner of the Golden Triangle to understand how it was done. Every family was involved in crime there, and now no family is involved in crime. So there's been a significant change across genders, across generations, and so on. And we sometimes we can't explain ourselves, so we have to ask our own people. So we are trying to write down a book in English for next year, when it will be our 50 years of the beginning of this process, and try to understand how large community restorative justice has worked and has changed the history of the country, where leaders were involved and criminals were all involved, and the large majority of the people have accepted this kind of process. I don't know what will be the result of this historical research, but I'm trying to help my friends in this very special kind of restorative justice here in Thailand.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sandro. And I have to tell everyone here that Sandro and I met through LinkedIn. And it was a long time ago, and I saw that he was doing work with the UN, UNICRI, and he had a publication that he, as the director, a publication inside the organization called Freedom from Fear. And he graciously invited me to write for it. 2 or 3 articles were published, and then down the road I asked him to join. And at first he wondered the connection, if we really had a direct connection between human rights and restorative justice. And I said, we really want you here. So it was wonderful for Sandro to join us, and we're glad you're with us today, because the UN is important to the work that we do in expanding the use of restorative justice around the world. So thank you.
Thank you. I will have to leave early today, and in a few while you will not see me anymore.
But we'll see you again. Thank you so much for being here. And let's go on to Joe Barry. Joe, welcome from the UK. And yeah, unmute. There you go.
Thank you. Oh, it's an honor to be here with you all. And thank you, Lisa, for your inspiration and hard work. And at these times, it's just so good to be involved with other people who understand the restorative way, and we can be more, I'm already more inspired. So I'm here because 20 years ago, I did my own restorative process. I went and met the guy who killed my father on my own. It broke all the rules of everything to do with restorative justice. He had been part of a terrorist group called the IRA, and he came out of prison as part of the peace process. And I went because I knew my healing depended on seeing him as a human being. And I wasn't going to get that from the media who demonized him. So I just went on my own, and we had a 3-hour meeting, just him and me. And looking back on it, I facilitated him to open up and to share his own story. That led to us meeting and speaking around the world over 300 times. And it's inspired me to really understand that the restorative way means that people choose to change. Patrick McGee said if I'd gone in there blaming him and shouting at him and going, "You're wrong, you're bad," he would have stayed in a very safe place of righteousness. But he chose to change because it came from inside himself. He moved from his head to his heart, and his journey began. So since then, I've got a peace charity, and I talk about the power of restorative processes, restorative justice, wherever I go in the world. I've become a practitioner locally, and they always give me the homicide cases. We actually do sexual harm where I live, but I have not done one till I'm trained. Just been given a new case today, and it is a homicide case. I work a lot in schools, so I take my story as a starting point of how do we have a conversation about repairing harm? How can we challenge each other with dignity? And since COVID, I'm having to, like many people, reinvent myself and do things differently. But my passion is to be part of a world which is completely restorative, where no one is demonized or punished, where we actually create safe places for the harm to be repaired. And in my country right now, there's an awful lot of blaming and demonizing going on. And so my commitment is to, there's nods from Ray and Vi, who are also from England. You know, there's lots to do, and my commitment is to do everything that I can for the rest of my life, and yeah, to talk about restorative processes. So thank you.
And Joe, did you mention your organization?
No, probably not.
Oh, I know. Go ahead.
Building Bridges for Peace. So it's a tiny charity because it's just me doing this work, but I do it from morning to night, and just so passionate about it.
Wonderful. It's so great to have you. And years ago, I interviewed Joe on paper, and which was published by Prison Fellowship International, I think at the time. And then we did a podcast, but we always appreciate you, Joe. You're an incredible champion. Thank you for being here. So next, let's move on to Don John O'Malley. Are you with us, Don John?
Yeah. Good afternoon or good evening from here. Lisa, thank you very much for bringing the world together to do RJ. I think you remain a pillar of global restorative justice to everybody. I say kudos to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've said before, my journey to restorative justice started when I was a prison officer, and I didn't like what was going on within the correctional facilities. So I started speaking against the kind of injustice ongoing there. And from there, Rotary Foundation International gave me opportunity to travel to the US to understudy the United States justice system at that time. And lost the host asked that. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
I didn't know if you wanted to be on camera. Good. And let me just say too that Professor O'Malley's from Nigeria. Okay, continue.
Thank you very much. So, the British and the Rotary Foundation gave me opportunity to visit the US to study the US justice system at that time. And when I returned, that was in 2002, and I returned back to Nigeria, the British government gave me opportunity to study at master's level in the UK through the British Chevening Scholarship. So when I went to University of Leicester, I did an international review of restorative justice for Nigeria as part of my dissertation. And at the end of my master's degree, I also got a studentship to do my doctoral degree in restorative justice and victimology at De Montfort University under Professor Brian Williams, who is late now. So since then, I have been involved in restorative justice as an academics, at the same time practitioner, and doing a lot of advocacy in Africa here to make sure that we mainstream restorative justice in our criminal justice system and give victims a voice in the way justice is done down south in Africa. And I said, I am very, very grateful to Lisa Ree for projecting me, because she was the one who found me, started doing podcasts with me, and then projecting me. And then from there, the UNODC invited me to join a team that reviewed the second UN handbook on restorative justice in Bangkok. And I told Lisa that I got an invite from UNODC. Lisa now linked me up with Sandro again. So Sandro, we met in Bangkok for the first time, and it was a great meeting. Thank you very much for everything. And we are doing our best to make sure that we have restorative justice mainstreamed in criminal justice system in Africa and give victims a voice in our justice system. God bless you all.
Excellent. Thank you, professors. Thank you so much. And I know you met Sandro Calvani, and so the two of you met in person. I've yet to meet you two in person, but you met first. So that's great.
Yeah.
And you know what we're really about is connecting people and shining a light on the good work that you all are doing. So wonderful. And let me just add to something that you didn't say. We did a podcast with Professor O'Malley, and we also put up his article on restorative justice and extremism in the world, which is very important, and you all should take a look at that. Okay, so let's move on to Ray and Vi Donovan. Welcome, Ray and Vi. Wonderful to see you. And I have you muted here. Let me unmute you. So they are from the UK. They're dear friends of mine, and we recently had a Zoom call just to talk. But Ray and Vi are victims of violent crime in the UK. So, and also our first ambassadors of restorative justice for RJI. So go ahead. Wait a minute.
Justice was our son was murdered by a gang of people, but 3 got found guilty and put in prison. Our very first restorative justice, we knew nothing about it, did we?
We didn't understand what it was.
When the boys were found guilty, we were taken upstairs to a restaurant in the court. And one of the fathers walked in and we just talked. We went back for sentencing 2 weeks later. The same father and me, we just talked again. So we had a restorative justice meeting in the court. Then about 3 years later, a phone call from a local church. One of the boys had seen us on TV and would want to meet us. So we arranged to meet his wife in a restaurant without anybody there, no facilitators. We met his wife. We had a good 2-hour meeting, wasn't it? Then we got involved in with Prison Fellowship. We've been going in and out of prisons all around the country. We've been to Africa, America, and we've just been promoting restorative justice, the benefits of it. We go in schools now, we train teachers and we train people. We've got a big training session coming up soon with probation in London. We met the boys, the first one we met was in 2011, and we got the truth. In court, this boy said, "I'm innocent, Dad, I didn't do nothing." When he met us, he went, "I was a 15-year-old coward, I murdered your son and I'm sorry." The second boy, we met him a year later, didn't we? He didn't walk in the room, he ran. He ran up to me, grabbed hold of me and cried on my shoulder like a baby. He sobbed his eyes out. We tried 4 or 5 times to meet these boys, but the professionals kept getting in the way. By now, we make sure they're trained properly. The victim is ready to go, let them go.
Unless there's a risk assessment attached to that, then absolutely, why not listen to the victim? And so realise when those boys went off to prison and they were sentenced and went off, that we hadn't really ever got the truth. And what we really needed to know was why they killed our son. Why did this happen? What was that all about? but nobody was trained then in 2001. They weren't trained in this country. Nobody really understood our needs were. And so we set out to try and make people understand what the victims' needs might be. We ended up having met our boys eventually, going around the country with restorative solutions in this country and helping those who are trained, from senior police officers to youth offending to probation to victim support to everybody, but anybody who wanted to be in these conferences and train. And we did that for 5 years.
How we got to meet the boys, it was Christopher's 10-year memorial. And a lady from YME, her name's Sean West, don't know if any of you know her. She was the CEO back then. And she said, how come you keep going in prisons, you do all this work and you haven't met the boys? I said, we tried a few times, but the professionals kept getting in the way. And she said, can we have a go? We went, yeah. So they got in touch with a charity called Calm, Confidential Local Mediation. They came, and their attitude when they walked in our house was so peaceful. The first questions they asked us was, what can we do for you? What are your needs? No one asked us that before.
In 11 years, nobody had ever asked us what our needs were. And we really realized that actually nobody in this country really understood, even victim support, what the needs of a victim might be. Everything about our country is not empowering.
And it's the wording. It's the wording. We were at a conference in a university, and the head of victim support up the north of England, I won't tell you where, it's up the north of England, kept calling him my victims. He kept saying my victims, my victims. In the end, I got so annoyed, I took the mic and said, we're not your victims. No one's your victims.
No,
they're your clients. So please,
friend.
If you're working with people, don't say they're your victims. We are not your victims.
So we've been up against it in this country very hard. Absolutely, very hard. And so we started thinking about schools and thinking about what children behavior and what they might need in a restorative way. So we've been talking in schools for years now about what their needs were, what the needs of a bully might be, what the needs of a victim of a bully might be, and helping them understand a restorative process, and also training teachers. We've been training teachers and ed teachers in this country for a while now, but there's still a lot more work to do, as Joe very adequately put. There is a long way to go.
You see,
but we're still pushing. We're still pushing.
I don't know what it's like in your country. If you're in this country, if you're a bully, victim stays in school and the bully gets 2 weeks holiday.
Yes, it's very strange.
Yeah. And one of the boys that killed Chris, he was a bully in school, but no one did nothing for him. They kept sending him away for 2 weeks and this, but no one sat down and talked to him or talked to his victim with him. And so we now talk about the power restored to justice with bullying. Yeah. The power restored to justice with thieving. And we've seen schools turning around. The ethos has turned.
Those schools that have taken up a restorative practice have seen a reduction in the problems they have with children, do not have to refer so many children onto a referral school, which is so much the better for everybody.
And when we go to prisons, at the end of our talk, probation might or someone from the prison staff will come with a clipboard and say, who would like to meet their victims? And there is a queue. There's a queue of men and women wanting to meet their victims, like they're here in the parish. They've never before heard of it, have they?
So we continue to do that too. We continue to go into prisons and help offenders understand what it's like to be on their side, and also giving them the opportunity to tell us.
We must say this ain't small crime. This is murderers. We've also spoken Belfast. We spoke like that lady. We spoke to IRA and UDF terrorists.
Yes, just like Joe, we've been doing that too. From anybody that really wants to take this up, we've actually been talking this morning about training some groups in smaller communities in London. So we're about to, well, once this COVID calms itself down, we may be able to carry that on and start training more local communities in this, and using it in where there's disputes with neighbours and things like that. So absolutely, it rolls on. There's a long way to go, as Joe said, but we're still doing it. We're still pushing and fighting, and we want.
Excellent.
I mean, before we finish now, I'm going to leave you a saying. You can borrow it. You can take this saying. Restorative justice turns a monster into a human being.
Absolutely.
Because when that person walks in a room, they're not an offender, they're not a villain, they're a human being. And that's how a lot of victims see him because of restorative justice.
Yeah. So there you go.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you both. And when we first met on a Skype call, I think we talked about how we both supported Sycamore Tree and how, you know, like Martin said, I directed the first one. Pardon me?
It's the best program that's in the British prisons.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes, and it was great to hear that you were involved in it and that you support a victim's right to restorative justice, which I know so many of you do here. So let's move on. Upneet from India. Dr. Upneet Lally, it's so great to have you, and introduce yourself and talk to us about the recent international conference that you were very much involved in and we spoke at.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. It's an absolute delight and an honor to be with the RJI family and to hear all of you. It's so inspiring, I would say. And thanks to Martin. Yes, we did get to connect with Mary and Alba and Joe and Colleen and the others at the RJI World Conference. In India, I'm a psychologist. I belong to the north of India. I'm also a law student, I would say. I deal primarily with the training of prison staff and police staff, and being a psychologist, I also have been involved with research work. One of the researches which I've recently concluded and I'm still about to conclude is on the sex offenders in the Indian prisons. And one of the things that, of course, we have found also some cases of wrongful conviction as well. And the conference that Lisa has spoken about. Now in India, we do not have any established restorative justice movement. And I would say that I do write frequently on criminal justice system issues. I work in the area of human rights, and I keep, you know, I think awareness is very important in the community. So I write frequently. And this conference was with the Law University, where we had collaborated, and it had people like, of course, we had experts like Lisa, Brian Steels. We also had another member of the GAC. He's not here with us. Of course, cases of wrongful conviction were discussed by both. And we also had formers from Sri Lanka, where they discussed about the conflict situation and how restorative justice had proved effective in that process of bringing about peace. So, of course, in India, we are again in an era where we are, it's like US during Trump era. It's almost like we are having a lot of focus on harsher penalties, and the voices of restorative justice are something that need to be heard, because I've also worked with the judiciary and with the victims. Victims moved in ground, and the needs of the victim now are being discussed. We still have a long way to go in terms of initiating any formal projects by the government or the criminal justice system. But yes, there is scope, and that's how we are debating, of course, with the legal fraternity as well, of how in small measures we could initiate. And it's an absolute, it's been a learning experience for me to hear all of you at different points of time and try and bring about some change. I would say I'm more of a catalyst towards change. And I'll also share with you, yes, I've had some discussions with prison inmates, and they are so much wanting to also talk about their own experiences, and of course, apologize also, some of them. So it's a beginning, I would say, that we are making. And thanks to Lisa for connecting all the experts around the world. Thank you so much for your leadership, and an absolute honor to be amongst all of you.
Great, excellent. And it was an honor to be in that conference. That conference went something like 9 hours, if you can imagine that. I just jumped on at the tail end, and that was like at 6:30 in the morning, my time. But it was an incredible effort, and Upneat really was very much responsible for that huge conference. And you're a real champion, Upneat, there. And we'll learn from you as you learn from us around the world. So thank you so much. And by the way I met her was I saw one of her pieces that was published in a newspaper in India, and what she was saying was very much in line with our mission. So that's why I recruited her. So thank you. Wonderful. So Austin, let's go to you in Ireland. Thanks for being,
Lisa.
Thanks for
Hi,
being
everybody.
with us.
I suppose I like Joe. My situation involves the IRA, and my dad was killed by the IRA. He was a chief prison officer in Portlaoise prison during the troubles here in Ireland, and I went into the prison service afterwards, and I'm an assistant governor in the Midlands prison now. But I suppose it is very similar to Joe. I broke all the rules and attempted to do a restorative justice with the IRA, and it led to me having myself and my brother being brought away up the side of a mountain in the back of a blacked out van to meet the IRA leadership, where we were given a certain element of truth. I suppose for 30 years they denied that they'd murdered my dad, and they admitted at that meeting that they did murder him, but they then claimed that it hadn't been sanctioned. But I had my own information through contacts I had made myself, which suggested some people very high up in the political wing who had transformed into the political wing had sanctioned it. So that's why they couldn't go there and say, give a 100% of the truth. But I've been working for a peace and reconciliation through commission type scenario, and been helping other victims. It's quite difficult because neither government nor the IRA want to do that. They all self-serving interests, I suppose. But it's quite interesting. Some of the research I've done. When you do focus groups with victims, they can be led and said by stronger people in the group. But when you do the quantitative piece, it's looking at like 93% of them would look at alternative forms of justice, such as restorative justice. So, I keep plugging away. And I mean, I met Mary and Joe personally, so I know I've met them. Mary, we tried to, we're involved a number of years ago in trying to bring restorative justice into the prisons here in Ireland, and because that's something I'm very passionate about. And it's just meeting roadblock after roadblock because the powers that be just don't want to go there. They really don't. But I have done a lot of restorative justice meetings and conferences with prisoners and their families, say with long-term prisoners getting out and going back into the family unit, which is something people really never think about. And how is that mostly male going to, kind of bring himself back into the family home where, after doing 18 or 19 years in prison. I've also done conferences where young fellas would have forced their mothers to bring drugs into the prison to them, and the mother got caught. She ends up with a criminal conviction, and doing those sort of conferences. I've done quite a good few of those within the prison setting. And I'm doing quite a few I'm involved with a local family resource centre, and I've introduced the restorative justice into that, and we've settled some disputes, particularly between the travelling community and the settled community in relation to that. So that's where we're at the moment, Lisa. And again, like everyone else, just thanks for your leadership on this. And it's great to connect with everybody, and I'm glad that we have 2 more Irish people on the advisory council now as well.
Great. Well, it's wonderful, Austin, to have you. And for those who don't know Austin's story, the specifics, we did a very long podcast. I think, Austin, your podcast was the longest because we got to hear your complete story.
You can't shut me up when I start, please.
But also we did a really important podcast this year a legacy podcast about the life of John Hume, who from Ireland, a great humanitarian and justice champion with Pat Hines and Austin. So look for that as well. So we're so glad to have you, and your comment about barriers in prisons. Well, that's what we're here for. We're going to remove those barriers, and it's through your voices that we do that. So it's great to have you. So let's move on. Paulo, are you there? Great to see you in Brazil, and unmute. There you go.
Hi there, how are you going? It's very good to meet you again, almost and crazy. Conducting several online trainings since June, in the mornings, afternoons, evenings, including weekends. So I was unable to keep in touch with you. So it's very good to see you again. My work here will end next week, so I'm finally going to get some rest. So I am a psychologist. I live in Brazil. I'm a Brazilian, and I have been working with restorative justice for something 10 years. And in that period, I've conducted around 800 circles or more. Gender-based violence, children, adolescents in government shelters, homicide, sexual abuse, schools, prisons, family cases, and so on. Currently, almost all of my time is dedicated to conduct courses, workshops, and lectures online. Next week, I will facilitate a transformative circle for a case that I've been attending for 7.5 years about intrafamily sexual abuse. Next Wednesday, I'll do that. Very complex and interesting case. So I'm looking forward for that, since we're working in this case since 2013, I guess. So it's pretty much it. I'm very involved in restorative justice in the past years, and that's all that I've been doing. And it's very good to see you all. Welcome to the new members. I hope that you stay with us for a long time. It's very good to have the chance to meet all you from all around the world. So thank you, and I hope that you are doing well during this pandemic. And it's not been easy in Brazil. We get more than 180,000 deaths, so it's been very bad. Things is in the worst at this moment. I've been inside this room since March. I was in Mexico conducting some trainings for the judiciary there, but I went back to Brazil, and I'm here in front of this camera from all of this year. But it's good. I'm alive. I'm well, and so I have to be thankful for that. So yes. Thank you, guys, and whatever you need from Brazil, need to know, I'm available to you. You can count on me, okay?
And so, Paulo, you have to mention the training that we did together.
Oh, yeah, it's true. I've conducted a training of 120 hours, and Lisa was with us. We have people from 7 different countries besides Brazil. And I've introduced very much material from psychology and philosophy in this training. It was very good, very interesting. We didn't talk only about restorative justice per se, but philosophy, psychology, the things that we need to know when we work with people, about relationships and etc. so on. So it was very good. Thank you again, Lisa. And next year we'll probably do a little more of that. Who knows? We can do it with all of these people, an RJI training on restorative justice. We can do that.
Yes.
Why not?
Yes, excellent. And Paulo also has a particular interest in policing, and we've had Zoom calls where we talked about restorative policing, which we hope to do more on through you all at RJI. So thank you, Paulo. Did
2 weeks ago, we ran a training from the military police here in my city. They start working with restorative justice point of view. Is very interesting. So the people who work, the policemen, they work with gender violence, schools, and community policing. So they started to use restorative justice ideas, philosophy, and practices. So we're very good, happy with that. Thank you again.
Yes, and let me just add on to that and remind those who are listening that RJI was very involved in putting out a white paper in 2016 on restorative policing. We worked with an international committee to do this, and we had a working group that included Terry O'Connell from Australia, who is a great leader on this issue, restorative policing. And there's a recent podcast with him as well on our site, but we continue to want to push that issue around the world. And as we know, it's so needed. Okay, so thank you, Paulo. And next, Pastor Jack Sullivan Jr. in Ohio. You there? Oops. You're muted, I think. Whoops. Well, we're having a little problem. Whoop. No.
Okay.
No, you're still.
Off my video. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay, is that better? All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. And it's a privilege to join this distinguished panel from around the world for today's conversation. And welcome to our new members. I'm Jack Sullivan Jr. I greet you from Columbus, Ohio, in the United States, where I am the executive director of the Ohio Council of Churches, a 101-year-old organization that brings together 17 church bodies in Ohio for education, worship, and social justice-oriented public witness. I'm a Christian minister, liberation theologian, and social justice activist. And I was introduced to Lisa and RJI through the wondrous work and life of one of the world's foremost humanitarians, Bill Pelkey, who died about a month ago, suddenly after a heart attack. Okay, so I am grateful to have worked with Bill in an organization called Journey of Hope, From Violence to Healing. We are largely people who have lost loved ones to murder, who out of our anguish and pain, dare to speak out against capital punishment, against executions, and in favor of restorative justice. Now, I have been working on restorative justice since the 1990s. Even before I had a name for the work, I was doing it as a pastor, working to support congregants who were in court facing jail or prison terms. And I was grateful once I had language for the work to identify with others around the country and then the world who had been carrying out this work. But most of my work under this umbrella has to do with ending the death penalty in my state of Ohio, first and foremost, and then in other states around the United States, and finally through the federal government. And I'm part of this network of people in Journey of Hope and other organizations who are saying to the government, executions do not help victim family members arrive at wholeness or healing. They just continue the cycle and the pattern of death that consumed our loved ones. And so we speak out to the government, don't kill in our names. Don't invest millions of dollars in the matrix and machinery of death. Invest that money instead in restorative practices, in that which has the possibility of bringing us healing and wholeness under the banner of restoration. So my ministry is largely largely following these ideals, and I'm very happy to blend my thoughts with those of all of you on this panel as we move forward. I do give some attention to restorative policing, and do expect that in 2021, my organization will have a conversation on the future of policing, because we continue to be plagued by extrajudicial murders of Black people in the United States by the police for no good reason. Then, of course, the reason that we attribute these to is systemic racism in the presence of many law enforcement officers, not all, but many law enforcement officers in our country. So I look forward to learning from all of you and sharing whatever I can for the common good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Pastor. And Pastor Jack, did you mention your sister in your remarks?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. 23 years ago, my younger sister, Jennifer, was murdered in her home in Cleveland, Ohio, which is my hometown. Her 2-year-old daughter was in the house at the time. We're not sure what she saw, but we know she was in the house. And so I have been dedicating my anti-death penalty work in memory of my younger sister, whose murder has not been solved. But I know that my family has believed that executing persons convicted of violent crime, and often convicted unjustly, does not help us. We would like the right people to be convicted, and we'd also want to figure out some ways to be involved in restorative justice, even for people who have made us the angriest and hurt us the most.
Yes, excellent. And Pastor Jack joined us, as he said, because of Bill Pelkey. Bill Pelkey was on this body, and he took a sabbatical and decided to step away. And as it turns out, as Jack said, our dear friend Bill Pelkey passed away in this month, and we did a podcast tribute to his life. But because of Bill, I met Jack Sullivan, and here he is today. So thank you so much, Jack. And there's a podcast with Jack also about his story on our website. So we appreciate so much your involvement in our work. Thank you. And so lastly, we have Peter B. Collins from San Francisco, my dear friend that I've known forever.
Good morning. And the lighting has shifted here as the sun came up. And it's washing out part of my face here, but it's really great to be with you. I do want to add my welcome to Albie and Marie. And I just briefly, my background is that I've been involved in addressing wrongful conviction through the Freedom Foundation, which was founded by a prisoner at San Quentin in the 1970s. Lisa partnered with me to work through the parole process. And that founder, Dennis Jones, was paroled in 2000 and remains alive and free, and has not been involved in any criminal justice proceedings. And, you know, wrongful conviction presents a different kind of victim. A victim of the system, a victim of wayward prosecutors. And we're seeing a real trend in the United States to address the prosecutorial misconduct that leads to wrongful conviction. And I'm very pleased, you know, here in San Francisco, we have Chesa Boudin, who RJI endorsed, who is making some very strong moves, and he's not alone. There are prosecutors that have set up wrongful conviction units, and so we're seeing a real awakening. But the observation I would like to share here is just how touching it is for me, because I've been involved in this work for a long time, and it can leave you cynical and jaded. And this group, the testimonies that have been presented here this morning, shows a real conscious broadening of the definition of victim. And, you know, we have media stereotypes driven by television and Hollywood that victims only want retribution. And I think we all understand that emotion, that reaction, but people evolve beyond that. And this is so refreshing and strengthening to hear people say, you know, the system has defined me as a victim, and I don't want to be in that box. And, you know, just everyone who has spoken from a victim's perspective shows that you recognize the loss, the pain, the suffering, but you don't wish to propel that forward. And so I just want to thank everybody who has taken up this work, particularly driven by a painful episode in your own lives. And the more that we can spread this and the healing concepts of restorative justice. And, you know, I've been in San Quentin hundreds of times. And sadly, I believe that we need prisons, that some people need to go to prison. But we have created a complex that is self-perpetuating. And we often don't look at what we have done. In California, we have corrected errors of the past where the felony murder rule has been repealed, where the 3 strikes law has been modified. And those were bad policies that were implemented to try to pander to public opinion by frightened politicians. And, you know, our governor here isn't perfect, but he put a moratorium on executions. There is another effort just starting up to pass a ballot measure to formally end capital punishment in California. So we're seeing what I think is an important trend shift. And this is a group of thought leaders and people who I consider to be highly evolved, who are bringing new perspectives. And I'm just really grateful. Thank you.
Wonderful, Peter. And I've known Peter forever, and we've worked together so many years. And he actually moderated the video speech we did for RJ World, the conference that Martin coordinated. And we thank you. He also is the narrator of our short video that's on our website. But he's a dear friend, and we're so glad to have you, Peter. As you say, I think all of us here through this council and the work that we do with our affiliates, that we're pushing the envelope and we're redefining what justice looks like, which is restorative justice. So thank you so much. Did I miss anybody in this group? I don't think so. Did I? Looks like we got everybody. Well, let me just briefly introduce the subject that I mentioned I was going to have you talk about. It's going to be hard for everybody to speak about it, but COVID-19. I just wanted to bring that up and get some of your thoughts at this hour, especially since the two or more vaccines are available around the world, and we're about ready to put out a statement talking about the need to vaccinate prisoners and staff, but prisoners in particular around the world. So Austin, do you want to start there? Just share a little bit.
Yeah, well, I have no information yet as regards where they're going to start with the vaccinations as regards prisoners. I do know that at the moment prison staff are in what they call the 5th tier of people to be vaccinated in Ireland. That's the only information I would have on that. We're trying to get moved up to level 2, which will be the same as the healthcare workers. But I have no information yet as regards where they are as regards vaccinating prisoners.
So Austin, did you mention in your comments, I forget, that you're an officer, a prison officer?
Yeah, an assistant governor in the Midlands prison, yeah. So we have no information yet as regards the rollout of the vaccination into the prisons.
Right, and Austin, by the way, also early on got COVID. So you're okay, but you were,
yeah. I had it pretty bad for about 4 or 5 weeks now. It took it out of me for a good while. But we were lucky in the prison that we had one kind of outbreak. We staved it off for a long time, and we had one outbreak which was in the prison I work in the Midlands, and we were lucky. The procedures we had put in place as regards keeping the prisoners segregated on landings and unit and wings worked, and that one guy came back from court and he basically brought it into the prison when he came back from court, and 7 other prisoners then got infected as well, and some staff. But we managed, what we did was a mass testing as a result of that, both staff and prisoners, and we managed to keep it at the 7.
Yes, and let me just say this before we add other comments. In March and in April, RJI put out a statement. It was our recommendations on COVID-19 in prisons and jails, and talking about the need to provide all the necessary gear that inmates to keep them safe from COVID, and staff PPEs, but also that there are certain offenders that should be released, that would be safe to be released in the community early, and other comments and recommendations. So why don't you raise your hand if you have a comment to make about COVID? Upneat, maybe?
Yes. So the frontline workers who are going to be given the vaccine are more of the health workers and the police staff. Prison staff, you're not sure as yet. And yes, in April and May, we've had this movement, and which is continuing till now, is the release of prisoners. We've had high-powered committees, and particularly the old and the vulnerable, both convicts and under trials, they have been released. And we've had a huge number. In fact, our overcrowding problem in the prisons has reduced. And what it has shown to the public is they're not a threat. So we really need to be out of this prison box. We need to start thinking of alternatives. So hopefully this will bring back change as well.
Yes.
And
so other comments?
yes, I mean,
yes.
In terms of
Go ahead, Upneat.
Yeah, I mean, we are having agitation taking place, and people are without masks. So I really don't know in terms of our numbers increasing. But the infection, I mean, we've had 2 peaks, and hopefully it should reduce now. Let's see.
Yes. So let me just state, just in the United States, we're seeing many deaths in prison, and it's just obvious that nothing's being done to protect inmates. And I think especially with a new president coming in, President-elect Biden and Kamala Harris, that we hope that they'll address this issue and see it as a real public health threat. That they clearly, as Upneat said, are the most vulnerable. Nursing homes are certainly vulnerable, but those in prison obviously are as well. So other comments, any other comments about this subject where you are?
I'll just say briefly from Prison Fellowship's perspective in Australia, we haven't had many deaths. I'd say probably only 1 or 2 across Australia in prison, but the disruption caused by quarantining, particularly of staff, has actually caused riots, because the staff can't attend the centres, and then that's resulted in bringing in other staff from other prisons who aren't trained for that prison, which has resulted in riots in some cases. So it's a different challenge for us, but we seem to be over it at the moment, and it has caused huge disruptions to our programs in prisons, and which has had a knock-on effect. We still run chaplains in all the prisons, so that has been going well.
Okay, thank you. Other comments about COVID?
I just wanted to update in the last call, we talked about the California prisons. And, you know, nursing homes and prisons are the areas that I think have been really badly addressed. They are prioritizing nursing homes, but not prisons, for the distribution of the vaccines at this point. And we have a strange development here where back in May and June, a group of prisoners were transferred into San Quentin from Chino in Southern California. And it led to an outbreak and a wave of deaths at San Quentin. Well, in the interim, lawsuits were filed, and a state appeals court has ordered the Department of Corrections to reduce the population at San Quentin by half. The problem is that the positive rates at San Quentin now are extremely low, and these men will be transferred into prisons where the level of positive testing is much higher. And so the ruling of the court, which I support, was well-intentioned, can't really accommodate the displacement and the risk that is posed by transferring people out of San Quentin into places that have higher transmission rates. So the ability of the criminal justice system, the courts, and the executive agencies to coordinate is really showing up as a big flaw. And unfortunately, the only movement has been to release people early. They have not released lifers who are most vulnerable and least likely to reoffend. And so I have to give California a D or a D minus for its handling of the safety of the prison population. It's clearly not a priority.
Yes, and let me just say this, and we'll probably getting close to the end. You know, in the work that we do, given that our mission is to advocate for restorative justice around the world, I think some might even look at our work on COVID-19 and say, why are you involved in that? And well, as we know, it's kind of an issue of humaneness. That a system based on restorative justice would never seek to kill inmates inside a prison due to COVID-19. So to me, it's really a moral imperative that we speak out on it. And I think too, what's different about our work, RJI, and your work, is that we care about systemic justice reform based on restorative justice. And that's why COVID-19 has to be on our agenda. And it is. And so, like I said, we're going to be updating our statement that we put out and include, sorry, my volume, and include the issue of vaccines and that we urge countries around the world to make sure that the vaccines are available in prison. Any other comments about this, Marie? Yeah.
Comment is about COVID in general and restorative justice rather than specifically on prisons. But my experience is I've had 5 requests in recent times, 3 from individuals to do restore. I've had numbers, but to do restorative justice, where in 2 cases the offender is in prison. One is a sexual case, the other is a homicide. And the third is a domestic violence one where the offender is not in prison. But in all of those 3 cases, I've said, you know, with the current situation and whatever, that we will definitely get started on the work. I mean, we've been in conversation with the victims and myself, but we'll get really started into the next stage of the process in the new year from February onwards. So I think that will be the real challenge for us in Ireland. It's like, because we've been able to, and I think other practitioners as well, slightly push the work forward. But if this continues for a longer time, I think all the new innovative you know, Zoom land and all that. And the other that I thought might be interesting in relation to Peter's comments and others is I'm also involved with 2 cases involved with not false convictions or wrongful convictions, but wrongful accusations of clergy offending. And what seems to be wrongful claims, if you like, where the cases had gone to, you know, right through the systems, and the Catholic Church system and the Department of Public Protections. And the outcomes of it all is, anyway, no proceedings and all the rest, which doesn't of itself mean there's no truth to the claim, but I think in these cases there are, but people have been hurt by the Catholic Church system's response to them as much as by the complainant's accusation, if you like. So that's 2 other cases, and that's one of the things that I'm starting to see quite a bit, is this wrongful accusation and the legacy issues on the priest and his family and everybody and the system that still, you know, looks at him with some kind of suspicion. So we've begun to start talking about how are you ever cleared following a complaint of sexual violence against you. So, yeah.
Just add to that, and that Jeff Deskovic isn't with us today, who was wrongfully convicted and is the only one on our council who has been. And he's a great advocate for systemic justice reform based on restorative justice. So I hear what you're saying, Marie. That's another area. Jeff could certainly talk about you know, how he was wrongfully convicted and spent 17 years in a New York prison as an innocent man. So any other comments about COVID, and then we'll probably close it. Jack?
Another COVID, yes. Under the umbrella of restorative justice is the issue of systemic racism in the United States, which is a public health crisis for Black and Brown people. We know that there is widespread mistrust among many African Americans concerning the vaccine, particularly as we remember collectively abuses of African American people in the health and government systems. We've been experimenting on giving surgeries without anesthesia, giving diseases without treatment, and more. There is racism woven into the healthcare system. And we, I think, must be alert to that reality and address the vaccine and its spread or its availability to Black people and Brown people, but to make sure that racism is acknowledged and that every step possible has been taken to disrupt and dismantle racism from the healthcare system so that all will have access to the vaccine. And so that's very important under our umbrella.
Yeah, excellent. Any other comments on COVID? Joe?
Lisa, just to tell you, I need to go now. I will start the course in a few minutes, okay?
Okay. Thank you, Paulo. Feliz
Whatever
Navidad.
Yeah, gracias. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, Joe.
Things are very bad here in the prisons in England. I'm supporting someone whose husband is in prison, and they've been locked up since March, only allowed out for 20 minutes a day, even if that. They haven't been outside, they have no windows, they're just treated like worse than animals. They can't speak to their families. And in terms of any vaccination, they're going to be right at the bottom of the list. Those that are about to be transferred to open prisons, that's been delayed. And there's a growing problem of mental health, which is huge. The people who are working to change it don't know where to go because they have no voice. Things are very, very bad here. Not in every prison, but there are some which have just been left behind. In terms of vaccinations, they will be at the bottom of the list.
Yes.
So it's very depressing.
Yes. Well, we'll continue to work this issue. Any other comments on COVID? And then we'll probably close. Ray? And yeah.
Here, all you hear is
Okay. Nope. We're having trouble with hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Can you
Can
hear
you hear me now? I said, over here on the news, all we hear about are families saying they can't meet their loved ones in care homes, old age pensioners. But no one is talking about the young people, children who can't meet their mums and dads in prison.
Yes, yeah.
They're forgotten. They're just brushed off the radar.
Yeah.
You know, that these young people can't see their dads, their mums or nothing. And it's disgusting the way they've been treated.
Yeah, and I second what Joe was saying. It's all of that what she said is true, and not only that is we have this whole list of people who are going to get the vaccine, and I never even saw prisons on that list, let alone down the bottom. About you, Joe, I never even saw them on that list. You know, I was looking at where we were, where me and Ray are both vulnerable. So we're fourth on the list to get our injection, but there is nothing on there about prisons. There's about 10 or more on the list, but not prisons. And that's really quite scary and not good at all.
We should get together, Joe.
It's like the government hasn't even considered them.
Yes.
It's really awful.
Yes.
I mean, it's terrible. I don't know what to say about it.
And let me just say this, and then we'll conclude. I think that's why our voice is so critical at this time because of COVID, and we don't know exactly when COVID will disappear in our countries. So we have to work on it, and that your voices, especially those who are victims of crime, are so critical because restorative justice brings healing, but we also are concerned about those inside. And I think your voices, show that. But looking ahead in this next year, we have so much work to do. I'm sure we'll do a lot more virtually. We hope that we'll do more work with all of you doing training, more podcasts, but other really creative ways. And I'm looking at doing some organizing around subject areas where we can kind of work in little small groups on issues of concern, whether it's sexual abuse, serious violent crimes, wrongful convictions, etc. Policing, restorative policing, but we've got so much work to do and we really have a wonderful group here. So thank you so much for being a part of this today. Thank you. And thank you to all our new members. We're blessed by you, and Merry Christmas to you all. And here's to an excellent 2021. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Good. Good night and good morning.
Merry Christmas, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Merry Christmas.
Good
Merry
afternoon.
Christmas. God bless all.
Merry
Okay.
Merry Christmas.